All right, should be up and running.
Great, thank you. All right, welcome everyone. This is Melissa Rominato from MSF&W. We're going to wait maybe just about half a minute more as folks keep joining here before we get started on accessible data tables in PDF documents. All right, let's go ahead and get going. Again, I'm Melissa Rominato with MSF&W. Here with me today is Tyler Winters. We are going to be presenting today on accessible data tables in PDF documents. We're going to be focusing on most of our focus today will be on what we call complex data tables. And those are data tables that have cells that span across multiple columns and or rows. So they're a little more complicated than our simple tables that we looked at with our original sample document. Just before we get started today, a few reminders. The session is being recorded. The slides have been shared and either already are or will shortly be posted on the DX training site. In addition, we're going to ask that you go ahead and mute your microphones so that we can cut down any background noise or distractions. So if you haven't already, please mute your microphone. If you have a question, feel free to type that question into the chat as it comes up. When I'm speaking, Tyler will be monitoring those and letting us know so that we can address those at the time. There will be time at the end for questions as well, but we're happy to address them as we go also. All right, so let's go ahead and get started. So first, we're going to talk about the first rule in our Acrobat checker that has to do with tables. And there is a headers rule that checks for column and row headers. And it's making sure that those column and row headers are there because they provide labels for each data cell. If table content is not tabular, table content is not tabular content if headers are not applicable. And so really what we're talking about here are layout tables. So I want to give you an example of what to do with a layout table and also for you to know how to tell if something's a layout table and then what to do in Acrobat if you encounter one. So I'm going to go ahead and open a document here. So let me write one. All right, so this is an example document that contains a layout table. When I run my checker, you'll notice that I get that headers failed rule, and I have it in two places. So it's telling me that I don't have headers for either of these two tables. And we remember from our previous training that the
Highway 5 southbound at mile marker 94, like stand.
I'm hearing a little bit of background noise. If can you please, if you're listening, please mute your microphone. Thank you. All right, so I have here a document. I've got my headers failed, and again, in our previous documents, it was fine if that happened. No big deal. We could use the reading order tool and the table header to add those row and column headers. In this case, however, I'm going to zoom in a little bit so we can focus in on those tables. What you're going to notice is that these are not actually data tables. These are tables that are used for layout. Someone used them in this example in the place of columns. Really, they could have just used columns, right, to make for example, this first column and then wrap into the second column. But for some reason they use tables, and we're pretending we just received this document from somewhere and we need to deal with it and resolve this issue. So in order to do that, I'm going to switch over to my tags pane. Let me make it a little larger for you. And you can see that each of these tables is a 1-row, 2-cell table, and they have their list items inside of them. So whenever we have layout tables, we're actually going to, in the code, get rid of the table markup. This is not tabular data. It doesn't have column and or row headers. It is simply data where they used a table to lay it out. So I'm going to grab the non-table markup, and I'm just going to drag it above the table. So that leaves my table markup empty. I've got 2 empty cells. You can see there's nothing in the row and there's nothing in the table, and I can then just delete that table markup. So I'm gonna delete that tag. I do have a little more work to do because it's got each list in a separate list. It's got the left column in one list and the right column in another list. This is actually just one long list, so I'm just going to select those, drag them up, and delete that remaining list item. And I'm going to do the same thing for the second table. So again, I'm going to select the non-table tags, the actual content tags, drag them before the table. I'm going to delete the table, and I'm going to join those into a single list. So I always want to do a double check, right, and make sure I didn't mess anything up with my reading order. So I'm going to arrow through and make sure everything looks good. But that is how you are going to take content that is not tabular out of the table. Again, okay, thank you. I think Tyler got us all muted. Thank you. All right, now if I run my check again, you can see that I no longer have that error. That error was being triggered by the fact that there was table markup, but that table markup was used for layout only. I removed it, and now I'm good to go. So that's one situation with tables that we didn't really get much of a chance to talk out before, but I wanted to spend a little bit of time on it this morning and just remind you that if tables are used for layout, that the content is not tabular, pull those tags, whatever they are, out of the table and delete the empty table-related containers. So fairly straightforward. You might have already encountered this out in the real world, but there's a little example for us. Okay, so the meat of our discussion today is going to be about the table regularity rule. And again, that rule is checking that data tables contain the same number of columns in each row and rows in each column. And a complex data table has cells that span multiple rows or columns, making it irregular. So let me show you an example of what a complex table looks like. So we've got one here on our screen. It has row and column headers. So our column headers are metric 2020, 2021, and 2022. And we have row headers, performances, attendance, mutual handle, which is spelled funny, breakage, and those repeat for 3 different, I'm going to call them row group headers. So we have this Prairie Meadows here, Bluffs Run, and Iowa Greyhound Park. And those are kind of row group headers, right? So they apply to everything below them, but only until the next row group header. So, so we've got those cells that span, in this case, across multiple columns, and it kind of breaks the structure of our table. And we have to do some extra work in Acrobat to make sure that the relationships between not only our regular column and row headers, but this extra third axis of header is made explicit between that and the data cells that it applies to. So we're going to do some steps in Acrobat to make sure that each of those, each data cell is identified with those 3 header cells. So I've got instructions on the slides, but we're going to switch over and actually do this in real life. So I've got, let me kind of get my, it's funny how that looks sideways. Okay, so I'm going to open my table here. I've kind of zoomed in as much as I can so that we can see it all. I'm going to use my reading order tool. I guess first I should run my checker, and you're going to see I have a couple errors. I have header errors, and then I have that regularity error that, that we just talked about. So I'm going to close that, make a little more room on my screen. I am going to open the table editor. And again, the reading order tool goes away and it kind of changes the background color of those cells so that I know now I'm ready to interact with them. And I'm going to start with just my regular row and column headers, which is very normal and typical, right? So we've done this before. I'm gonna select all of them at once. I'm going to go to table cell properties. Those are going to be header cells and their scope is column. So they identify everything in the column below them. They changed to red, the rest of the table changed to gray. It's just going to try to give me a visual as I go along. So next I've got my regular row headers, so performances, attendance, and so on. I'm going to mark those as header cells and their row headers. And I'm going to do that for each set here. And okay, there we go. So that's kind of nothing new, right? We've done this before as far as setting row and column headers in tables in Acrobat. We knew how to do that. That's nothing new. But we've got these new layer of complex cells that apply to a group of data cells. So let's talk about what to do with those. For each one, Prairie Meadows, Bluffs Run, and Iowa Greyhound Park, I'm going to right-click, choose Table Cell Properties. In this case, it is a header cell, so I want to say that. It's not a data cell. However, the scope is not clear-cut, right? Because it applies to things both below it and to the right of it. So it's not simply a column header or a row header. It's a different kind of header. You will notice there is a both option in this table that actually doesn't do what we would like it to do. So we're not going to select that. We're going to leave it on none. Header cell none. And then I've got something else I need to check here, which is something we haven't really looked at before, and that is the row span and column span. So in this case, this cell only spans one row, so I'm going to leave that alone, but it does span across all 4 columns of the table. So the column span needs to be changed to 4. And when I do that and say, okay, I'm going to get a little bit of a scary message from Acrobat. Changing the span attribute may result in a malformed table structure. The table editor may not be able to display the table structure correctly. Do you want to proceed? I really have no choice. I have to say yes. If I say no, then I'm stopped and I can't finish remediating the table. So I'm going to say yes. It does this sometimes where there we go. I think I got it. It just, I don't know why it gets kind of stuck in a loop there. Let's see, it didn't keep my column span. Let me try that again. Oh, fun. There's always something new and exciting, right? Let me do a quick close and reopen here. It's that one too, just so I have a fewer tabs open there. See if it, go back into table editor mode. Whoa, a little too much zooming there. All right, let's try this again with our prairie meadows. Let's see if we can get that call span to stick. There we go. You'll notice that it did change to kind of the pinkish background. If I double check it, it did hold the row or column span this time. I need to do the same thing for Bluffs Run in Iowa Greyhound Park. So I'm going to select both of those at once. Table cell properties, header cell. I'm not going to change the scope because none of those really fit. And again, I'm going to change that column span to 4. I'm going to say, okay, get the scary message, say yes. And now it kind of looks more like what I'd expect, right? All my table header cells are marked up with that pink background. And then my data cells have kind of that gray background. So that looks nice. But unfortunately, even though I've marked those as header cells, the assistive technology is not going to be able to tell exactly where that starts and where that ends and how those relate to one another. So I have to do some extra work here in Acrobat to make it more explicit, the relationship between the table header cells and the data cells. Because the assistive technology can't just assume it by proximity. It needs to be spelled out explicitly. So I have some extra steps to do here in Acrobat. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to right click on the table and I'm going to choose auto generate header cell IDs. So I'm going to choose that. It's going to do a little thing. You can't actually tell that it did a little thing. But you can tell if you then look at one of these cells, and now in the ID field, it has an automatic generated ID for each cell that's marked as a header cell. So in this case, the ID is R1C1, that stands for row 1, cell 1, underscore, and the word metric, which is the contents of that header cell. You can type these in manually, but it's much easier to have the system auto-generate it for you. Also, if you have multiple complex tables on a page, those IDs need to be unique, actually not within the page, but within the document. So, there's a lot to keep track of if you're not auto-generating. So I'm just going to check a couple others just to show, yes, okay, they're there. You'll notice for my data cells, it did not auto-generate IDs. The IDs are only needed for my header cells. So that's one step. I've now got a unique ID that identifies each header cell of the table. And my next step is then to, for each data cell, identify which header cells describe it. So I'm going to right click on my first data cell. I'm going to go to properties. And in the cell properties window, I have the associated header cell IDs field. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to add the 3 header cells that label this data cell. So I'm going to use my plus sign here. I'm going to find the first one, which is going to be metric. And they're kind of usually, not always, but usually kind of upside down, top on the bottom. I don't know. So I'm going to choose R1C1, row 1, column 1, metric. And then I need to choose my next one, which is going to be 2020. I'm sorry, I don't know why I chose metric. I'm losing my mind. Let me do that over. The cells that that describe this $5,179 value are 2020 Prairie Meadows and performances. I got a little hung up there. So let me try this again. So I've got 2020. So let's find that. That one's pretty easy to find. Then I have Prairie Meadows. got my row group header there. Let's see if I can find that one. Prairie. And finally, I have performances. And this one might be a little trickier because there are multiple column or row headers there that start with performances. I want the one that is in row 3, cell 1, column 1, row 3, column 1 performances. Okay, so I've got that there. Now for this data cell, I've got performances, Prairie Meadows in 2020. I've got all 3 things that I need to describe this. So now when a screen reader user listens to the table and uses their where am I table reading commands, not sure why Acrobat is being so finicky about saving these things. Let me try it one more time real quick and see if I can get those to save. And performances. Oh, yeah. All right, well, that's lovely. It's not letting me save again, maybe because
what if you
yeah.
tried one at a time? So if you deleted 2 of those out and then try,
That's worth a
and see
try.
if
Thank
it'll
you.
or not.
I might have already you know, let me try that. Do one and see if it saves. Because it might already be remembering that I've been in there too many times. So okay. Yeah, that seems to be working. Thank you. Good idea.
Yep.
You shouldn't have to do that. That should not be a requirement, but it does look like for some reason with these dialog boxes in the table cell properties, it's being a little finicky today. So let me see if I can get that last one, performances. There we go. Okay. It's a little weird because like once you've saved, you know, there's no way to tell it's there unless you go back and look. But I would next need to go to my next data cell and do the same thing. I would need to go in here and add my 2021. Again, this is for Prairie Meadows. I'm going to try to do all 3 at once and see what happens this time. And performances. There we go. Once I got one, it seems like it knows what it's doing. So I need to go through and do that for every data cell in the table. This table is not horrible. You know what? I've got 36, I think, data cells. No, I didn't. Yeah, 36. So it's not terrible. I can get pretty fast at it, but you can imagine that the larger your table is, um, the increase in the time and effort on your end to make those associations between the header cells and the data cells that they label. So it's a lot of work when you have a complex table to make that accessible in Acrobat.
Melissa, we got a question in the chat from
Okay.
Melissa Myers. If you were to delete an entire column after setting all your associated cell header IDs, would the data cell info auto update, or would you need to go back and change every one of them?
I guess I'm a little bit unsure what you mean by delete a column. So in Acrobat, I can't make any changes to the physical view. I suppose, you know, I could go in here and artifact, you know, a certain column in a table, but I'm not going to be able to make any changes to the physical view. So this is something that you have to do in Acrobat. So you'd have to have your table set as it is, you know, in Word, you know, if in your source document, perhaps you would make a change. But then when it came back over to Acrobat, you would be redoing this process regardless, because you know, say that this is a table that you update every quarter with new values in Word, and then you save it over to PDF, you would have to go through this process again. If I didn't answer your question, let me know. I'm not sure.
But if for some reason you did delete a row or a column from the tags view, the original cells that you're putting those values on would stay, but I don't think, but then you're just going to have regularity errors and the table's not going to be finished.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. It's not something that is really flexible enough to do that kind of editing within Acrobat. But no, nothing gets, none of those get up. The only thing that gets updated automatically, or actually not updated, but just generated, are those IDs. Everything else here has to be done, as far as associating the header cells, has to be done manually. Okay. All right, so now we know what that process is and the steps that we have to go through for our complex tables. We've got to add the IDs to the header cells. We have to go into each data cells and put that list of related or associated header cell IDs. Now, we have some other options. Every complex table can be rearranged or split into multiple tables to avoid being irregular. So we can simplify our complex table. And I did that here. In this case, I added I'm going to call them locations. I'm not sure if that is what they are, but I added the location in with the metric name. So I've got Prairie Meadows performances for 2020, 2021, and 2022. Then I have Prairie Meadows attendance, and down here farther, I have Bluffs Run performances and attendance. I just combined basically those first two columns in this case, put them together. Now I've got a simple table. I've got the same number of cells in each row and column. I just have my normal 2 layers of headers. So in this case, the 5,179 cell is named by 2020 as its column header and Prairie Meadows performance as its row header. Simple. I might have to add mark those headers in Acrobat depending on where this was created, but I don't have to do anything with IDs or headers and associating them further. So pretty simple and straightforward, simplified table. Another option is, and before I go too far, is I could always add a new column. So maybe, location is a column. And after the metric, maybe it has the location. So there are multiple ways to do it. But I just, it can always be simplified. I could also break this into multiple tables. I could have a Prairie Meadows table, and it has the same column headers, and then it has rows for performance, attendance, mutual handle, and breakage. And then that table ends. Then I have a Bluffs Run table with maybe a heading that precedes it, Bluffs Run. And then I've got, again, my column headers and my row headers. So there are multiple ways to do it to break the table into simple tables. I also can change the way I've made the table complex. So this one I'm calling complex, but in a different way. So if a table must remain complex, there are things you can do to make it easier in Acrobat as far as the amount of work you have to do. So for example, you can use 2 columns of row headers or 2 rows of column headers or whatever instead. So in this case, instead of having that Prairie Meadows text here and spanning across all 4 columns, I have pulled it out to the left. I guess these are parks. I've pulled them out to the left. And now I have these parks that row span across all the rows that relate to their metrics. So now I am able to do just a tiny bit of extra work in Acrobat to make this work without having to identify every cell that relates to another cell. So let me show you what I'm talking about there. So, all right, so now I've got this table instead. Let me open my table editor. Whoops, sorry, clicked away too fast. So let's go ahead and work on this table. So I still, as always, have to add my column headers, right? That's nothing new. I've got an extra column, but nothing new there. I do have for my row headers, I have something new here, and that is that each row header is going to span across, I think it's 4. I'm doing this, see if I got that right. Yeah, it's a little hard to tell if I'm doing this right. Let me try something else. Yeah, okay. Hang on a second. Let me not save. Let me get out of here before, let me reopen. Okay. So I've got a few different issues here. So I've got my regular row and column headers, which are easy to do. Do those all at once. And then I have my cells that are going to have my row span, and I need to add those in. The challenge in doing that is kind of this physical view that sits, the table editor is kind of, think of it as drawn on top of the physical view, and it's not always quite perfect, and it's sometimes very difficult to tell what cells you're selecting in the physical view, especially when you have cells that span across multiple rows or sometimes columns, but mostly rows, I would say. So it's a little hard for me to identify and know when I'm selecting which cells because I've got multiple cells for each of these and they kind of look extra weird. So I'm not exactly sure, and I'm not sure how well that highlight is coming through, if you guys can tell which ones I'm selecting there. So in an ideal world, I can select one and I can add the appropriate row span to it and mark it as a row header. But in this case, it's a little hard to tell. So I'm actually going to go down the second column first. I'm going to select those. I'm going to mark those as my row headers. So these are still row headers in the performances, attendance, and handle breakage, all that stuff, just like it was in our simpler table. Those are still our row headers, but the difference with this table is that I have an extra layer of row headers. And it looks like I'm not going to be able, that's interesting. My table editor is being very finicky today. So I'm not sure which cell I'm selecting there. So I'm going to take a little bit of a different approach. Let me open this in the, and see if I can kind of identify it a little, see it visually a little easier here. I'm not sure if this is the right one, but let me try it.
Melissa, while you're trying that, we got a couple other questions.
Okay, great. You know, I can't see the chat today. It's not loading for me, so I appreciate
Okay.
you
Yeah,
letting
no problem.
me know.
So Lori asks, if you use the Adobe Tools panel, edit a PDF to add or remove a column or edit text, does the settings already set for accessibility change? So for the edit a PDF, you're not going to be able to add or remove a column. You can edit text. And I do know that if you edit text, and Melissa, please add on to this, but I do know if you add text, sometimes if it was already tagged in the tags tree, you may have to tag it again. I've noticed that when trying to fix character encoding issues or just when something just isn't working quite right. So you kind of have to go into the edit a PDF and make your text changes there. But so in that case, no, sometimes the accessibility settings for that specific word or section or whatever it is that you're editing will need to be retagged.
Yeah, so I think you're absolutely right. It's really going to vary. We typically do not recommend editing a PDF using the Edit PDF tool that I've got open here in Acrobat. Um, when you edit a PDF, you know, it's a little weird because you are changing the physical view. So whether that's, you know, maybe that's, you know, spelled wrong and I want to correct it. So I can have different issues. You can see I have an issue with this one. The font that I've used to create this document doesn't exist in Acrobat. So you can see that even making a change like that, I can't get the exact font that, so it's going to look different in the physical view. Um, Also, as Tyler mentioned, there, you know, it's there's the content layer, there's the tags layer, and there's the physical view. And sometimes changing something in the physical view will also make it change in the tags layer. That could mean that you need to re-tag something. That could mean that some of your content goes behind other content. So, you know, in the case where I have a background color on a table, it's possible if I do something here that the text will actually go behind that background color and will disappear from the physical view. So we really caution against making changes to the physical view. If you were going to make changes to the physical view, I would probably not do any of the tagging until afterwards, you know, just to be as safe as possible, so that I don't have to go through and redo or recheck every single thing. But again, you know, we really recommend trying to avoid editing the PDF because again, you're editing the physical view, which has a relationship to the content view or content layer and also has a relationship to the tags layer, but those things can get out of sync.
Okay, another question from Eric. What if your document containing tables is being converted to HTML and not a PDF for presentation on a website? Can you do all of the table accessibility settings in Word before converting?
So the only thing you can do in Word is it will automatically assume that your first row contains your column headers and your first column contains your row headers. And there's actually nothing you do for that. It's just kind of automatic. Um, if you are a person who is familiar with and working in HTML, this kind of ID and headers thing might seem familiar to you. So for those of you who are familiar with HTML, THs or table header cells can take ID attributes, and the value of those attributes can be a string that, I'm sorry, and the value of those attributes are used to connect the data cells. So then each TD would have a headers attribute, the value of which would be a string of the IDs. So this same concept of headers and IDs is present in HTML, but it's really going to depend on your content editor. Um, I'm not sure if you're like saving from HTML or from Word as HTML, or maybe you're copying something from Word and putting it into a content editor. And if you're putting it into a content editor, there are some that are smart enough to do the headers and IDs attributes for you, and there are some that don't. So it's going to probably vary based on your HTML editor for your content management system. And Eric, please feel free to unmute and explain a little further if I didn't have the correct scenario there.
No, I think that I'm we convert all of our Word files to HTML for presentation on our website, and I'm not very familiar with HTML besides how to convert, so I don't
And
know
so
if
when you
that.
say convert, do you actually save from Word as
Yep,
HTML?
yep.
Okay. Yeah, that's interesting. Um, and then just post those? Huh, that's an interesting question. Just for fun.
Didn't want to hijack the discussion. Sorry.
Yeah, that's okay. And we can talk about this more at office hours if that, if that's something we want to pursue, but I'm just a little curious. I don't think I've done this in years and years and years. So you use the web page or web page filtered. Do you know
Web
which
page
one?
filtered is what we
Filtered.
use. And like I said, I don't know much about it. I just know what I've been taught on how to convert.
Yeah, interesting. Um, Okay, well, let me look at the resulting and get back to you on that because
Okay.
I need to look at the HTML code it's
Yep.
producing and see what happens. But yeah, I hadn't thought about that. I didn't realize that was a scenario folks were using. So that will be definitely worth looking into.
Thank you.
Uh-huh. Okay, so I'm sorry, and let's go back to our complex in a different way because I didn't get trying to remember where I left off. I got my column and row headers put in, but I'm still left with these cells that span across multiple rows. And in this case, because I'm having, I think it's might be just because I'm having some weirdness with my table editor in general today. It's very difficult for me to see which cell I'm selecting in the table editor to add that row span to. So I'm going to try something and see if this helps me. I'm going to actually change this cell to a table header cell. Let me save that and let me reopen and see. Yeah, I can't tell anything different in the physical view. I'm going to do one manually, and you don't have to memorize how to do this. I'm going to just do it manually. Everything you do in the table editor, it's kind of crazy. You can also do manually. Um, and some of you maybe have already discovered that and have had to do that in your life, and it's not a fun thing. But so what I've done is I actually went in, and you can kind of see here now with the lines and the way things are separated. On that Prairie Meadows cell, I turned it into a table header cell. I gave it a scope of row, and I added the call span of 4. I'm sorry, row span. I keep saying the wrong one. Row span of 4 to go across. And again, I'm not sure why I'm not able to select those. I don't think that's going to happen to you guys in real life. I seem to be having some weirdness. But I'm going to do that real quick just so you can see the end result here. You get really fast at it if you do it a lot. Oh, I canceled instead of saved. I said that and did I do it? No, I did do it. Roast beef 4. Okay, that looks good. And I've got one other here. I think I just didn't refresh my editor view, and that's why it looks weird. Forgot to change that. So, yeah, so let me get these in here. And then I'll show you what it looks like in the regular way so that you can have a visual on that. Okay, so I did this manually, but now I should be able to select each one. So basically for each one, I selected it, and in the table cell properties, I made sure it was a header cell with a scope of row, and then I made sure that row span was set to 4 for each of those. And in this scenario, I don't need to do anything with those IDs or those associating the cells to data cells because it's smart enough to understand, the assistive technology is smart enough to understand the relationships here. And so now if I'm in this 5,179 cell and I ask, where am I? It's going to say 2020 Prairie Meadows performances. It understands the relationship. And again, that's because I'm using columns of row headers that are right next to each other. They're kind of stacked versus my first scenario when that relationship is not clear. They're not stacked. They don't have like that one-to-one relationship. So there is a way to make complex tables work with in PDF without having to do a lot of extra work, but it's really about the way the table is designed. So you might have to change the way your table is designed in order to get the that easy step. Just like you might choose to simplify it, or you might choose to change the way that it's complex. And let me give you another example here. We're just going to kind of wing one in Word to give you a new example. So let's say that we have a table, and maybe let's see, I'm going to make it a little bigger here. Insert 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, so let's say we have a table and we've got some, maybe it's like budgety type data, right? So maybe I've got Q1, Q2, Q3, and Q4. And then for 2024, I've got the same quarters. And then maybe this is like whoa, it's more columns than I wanted. Maybe this is like maybe you've got like a region. This is for region A, and I've got, office 1 and office 2 are in region A, and then maybe region B, I've got offices 3, 4, and 5. So, okay. So I've got this information, and I'm going to fill out my values. I'm just going to go simple here. Oops, a little too far. Tab happy. Okay, so I've got my table, I've got, everything filled out, and this is definitely a complex table, right? Because the next thing I'm going to do, I'm going to go ahead and add my office and region here, though. And maybe you wouldn't repeat those words, but I'm going to go ahead and merge my cells. So I'm going to say, okay, here I've got a merge. I hit split instead of merge. There we go. And I can center it, or, make it look the way I want it to look. I could add background colors and do all that kind of stuff as I desire. But if I structure my table this way, instead of some of the other ways, by adding like a row with region over those, I can have these multiple layers of column and row headers for each one. And I could even, I could have multiples. I could have, 3 layers. I could have 4 layers. There's really no limit there. And then let me save this. And I know it doesn't look pretty, but make sure I'm saving this in the right spot here. Just gonna save it. Okay, and now if I convert this to PDF, all right, so now again, if I convert it to PDF, I still have some regularity issues that I got to deal with. But I can use my table editor. I can mark my column and row headers. In this case, those are column headers because it came from Word. These are going to be column headers too, but they need their call span because they each go across 4 quarters. And then I can do the same thing with this one. It already knows it's a row header. This one has a row span of 2. This one has a row span of 3. I know I can go a little slower. Then I can mark my regular row headers all together, and I'm done. So I just did, and I know I was going fast, but I just did in a few minutes everything that I need to do to make this table accessible. So even though it has multiple layers, so for example, if I'm on this value of 2 right now, and I use my screen reader's where am I command, JAWS is smart enough to say we are in 2023 Q2 Region A Office 2, and then it will read 2, the value of the current cell. So when you are dealing with complex tables, you can think ahead of time how you want to structure those, right? You can always break them down and simplify them. You know, I could have a table for region 1, I could have region A and region B. I could also repeat, I could have 2023 Q1 here, 2023 Q2, so I don't have to have that extra layer. There are lots of different ways to do it and to make it work. And I realize now I made a mistake by putting my Qs in my office there. I didn't quite structure that correctly because I got well, I'm not going to mess with it now, but you can think about how you want to lay that table out, and you can use one of these alternatives like simplifying your table or making it complex in the way that those column and row headers are stacked with one another. And then you don't have to do the extra work of the IDs and headers. So when you're dealing with data tables, think ahead of time about how they're structured. And I know sometimes that can be hard. Sometimes we're pulling data tables into Excel. They're getting generated out of some kind of budgetary or reporting system. And, you know, maybe it's been done that way for a long time, but maybe there are some options to think about how to potentially restructure what's coming out of those systems, or at least do the restructuring in Excel or in Word, whatever your step is before you get to PDF, to make it so that as much information and relationships come across automatically, and you don't have to manually mark which headers go with every single data cell in the table. So it's complex, but it can be made simple in different ways. Any other questions? Okay, I do want to remind you all that we are still doing office hours every Wednesday at 9 a.m. So we'll have one tomorrow morning, and then we will continue on through at least the summer and really the rest of the year with those office hours sessions. We do have a redo of this tables session, so we'll be presenting this training again on May the 29th. That's a Thursday, so toward the end of the month. And in the meantime, please send anything you're working on, anything you have questions about, to this accessibility@msfw.com email address. And we can make sure that we get back to you and also address it in office hours so that other folks can see. Anne, did you have a question? I see your hand.
Yeah, I was wondering about alt text within a table and how, like, what the function, I guess, the alt text serves and how much detail you need to go into if you're doing things like adding, like, the header rows and things like that. Is the alt text just to provide context and to explain the content and fill in any gaps?
Do you have an image in your table that you're adding alt text to?
No, in the table properties, like in a Word table, there's an
Yeah,
example table
Yeah, alt
properties,
text is
add
not
alt
really a
text.
thing. I know that that it's on the word table properties. Alt text is meant as a alternative for non-text content. A data table is text content, so alternative text is not needed for tables.
Okay. Yeah. It's confusing that they have the option though.
It is confusing. And, I think
Yeah.
it's kind of like, oh, we have this thing, alternate text, we'll just put it everywhere, right? But yeah, that alternate text is only for non-text content.
So
You don't
if
need alternate text for a text-based
so if you
content.
have a table though, and if you put in alt text in the table properties, is that read to a screen reader user?
No. It's read for images.
But I mean, in the accessibility, it says that like the same text. How would you describe this to someone who's blind?
I know it's there. I'm not arguing with you at all. I know it's there. I see it. I'm sharing it right here on my screen. It is there, yes. But again, my best guess is that Microsoft said, oh, we have this thing called alternate text. We'll put it wherever we can. They already made the little widget and yeah, so we'll use it where we are. But again, the accessibility standards require alternate text for non-text content. And that is not the case here. When we have a table, we do have text content. You could have images inside your table. Inside a cell could contain an image, and that image could need alternate text. But again, that's for non-text content.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, no, good question. It is definitely confusing. I agree. All right. Well, we hope to talk to you guys tomorrow. Eric, I'll take a look at that HTML conversion and follow up, and we can also talk about it tomorrow if we've got time. So thanks, everyone, and we hope to talk to you soon. Have a good rest of your day.
Thanks, Melissa.